Right. That completes Prime Minister's questions. We come to the urgent question. I call the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Home Secretary to make a statement on the impact on public safety of the request to Chief Constables to reduce arrests in response to the prison capacity crisis.
Minister.
Well, I'm delighted, Mr. Speaker, to have the opportunity to talk about public safety, to talk about the record number of police officers we have in this country, 3,000 more than we had under the last Labour government. Delighted to talk about the fact that, according to the crime survey, crime is less than half today what it was under the last Labour government. Delighted to talk about the fact that homicide, 620 under the last Labour government in their last year, 577 in the last year. Delighted to talk about all of those excellent criminal justice results. Now, Mr. Speaker, I believe this question is a reference to a letter which was circulated about a week ago by Chief Constable Rob Nixon in his capacity as Criminal Justice Lead for the National Police Chiefs Council, in which he referred to short-term prison place pressures over a period of 8 days, which expires tomorrow. I can tell the House that I have spoken to Chief Constable Rob Nixon in the last half an hour, and he has confirmed to me that the contingencies referred to in the letter were not required. He said the contingencies were not required because the prison place situation in practice did not merit it. There have been, he said, no delays to arrests that he is aware of, and he has said that while a small number of people were conveyed to court in police cars and there were a small number of delays to arrival at court, no one who should have got to court, in fact, did not do so. So I'm delighted to confirm to the House the contingencies referenced in the letter, in fact, did not materialise, and the short-term fluctuation referenced in the letter will be over tomorrow.
Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to say, the Minister's response is just shocking. Telling people they've never had it so good, faced with the crisis in the criminal justice system, I think shows just how out of touch he is. The state of crisis in the criminal justice system after 14 years of Conservative government is now so dire that police chiefs were asked to arrest fewer people because the system could not cope. Operation Safeguard Silver update. They were asked to consider pausing any planned operations where large numbers of arrests may take place to ease the pressure within the criminal justice system, because this Tory government, in power for 14 years, had so catastrophically failed to manage the criminal justice system or build the basic prison places promised. Last week alone, there were 280 prisoners in police cells overnight. You've got early release, massively expanded starting tomorrow, including domestic abusers, and now this serious impact on public safety with Operation Early Dawn telling prisoner escort service just not to collect prisoners from police stations, to take them to court because there aren't enough places, and police forces having to pick up the pieces instead. The National Police Chiefs Council saying in its letter in the strongest terms, this is unsustainable and risks public safety. So tell us, Minister, what assessment did he do when these letters went out, when it hit this point of crisis, as to what the scale of the challenge was? Who does he think, in these circumstances, it's acceptable to not be sent to court because of his government's abject failure on law and order? Violent criminals, domestic abusers, repeat shoplifters, and which big operations involving lots of arrests does he think should be paused in these situations? Crackdowns on drug rings or grooming gangs, swoops on people smugglers, and when should they be paused till? Where is their plan? Mr. Speaker, arrests have already halved since the Tories came to power. Charge rates have already dropped through the floor. The legacy of 14 years of Tory government on law and order is more criminals let off, more victims let down. Britain deserves better.
Well, the Honourable Lady likes to pontificate in an animated fashion, but the fact is, according to the crime survey, crime has halved since the government she was a part of left office. She feigns indignation about the early custody release scheme. She forgot to mention that under the last Labour government, it ran for 3 years and saw 80,000 people released early. She references the letter from last week. I've got a message here from Chief Constable Rob Nixon, sent to me about 45 minutes ago, updating on the actual situation. So let me just read out to the House what this says. It says there have been... The National Police Chiefs Council Criminal Justice Lead said this: there have been no delays to arrests. He said there have been some minor delays in getting people to court, but everyone who needed to got there. A small number were conveyed by police, but there was limited operational impact. He says, and I quote, there has been no compromise to public safety, and the contingency of delaying arrests was not activated as it was not necessary. That is from the National Police Chiefs Council, sent 45 minutes ago. Those are the facts, and I suggest the Right Honourable Lady sticks to them.
Sir Robert Neill, more calm, I hope.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend the Minister agree that what is an important debate which touches upon public safety but also touches upon the whole way in which we operate our justice system is best dealt with in a calm fashion? It is perfectly reasonable to adopt contingency measures, which hopefully are often not needed, but the most important thing is to ensure that all parties in this House commit to a consistent and sustained investment in all aspects of the criminal justice system, because you cannot decouple policing from courts, from prisons, from the whole of the process. And that's actually the sensible debate that the country needs for us to have going forward.
Minister.
Well, my honourable and learned friend, as always, puts it very well. He's quite right that investment is important. That is why there are record numbers of police officers. It's why 20,000 prison places are in the course of being constructed, 5,900 of which are currently operational, 10,000 of which will be operational by the end of next year. It's why more money is being put into the Crown Prosecution Service. It's why my right honourable friend, the Lord Chancellor, who's with me here on the front bench, is ensuring that legal aid is properly resourced, as is the criminal bar. Those are all extremely important initiatives to ensure the public are protected. The ultimate measure of public protection is, of course, the overall level of criminality, which has, as I've said once or twice before, halved since the party opposite left office.
Show the Select Committee, Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And obviously public safety is paramount in all of this. And I do want to just say to the Minister that the fact that there were contingency plans being drawn up is of itself worrying. Whilst I accept what the Chair of the Justice Select Committee says, it's a sensible step to take, it is indeed very worrying, though, that you have to have contingencies in place. Can I ask him this? If in the future these contingency plans are activated, what happens if the police decide not to prioritise an arrest and in the meantime that person then goes on to harm someone? And I'm thinking particularly around offences of non-contact sexual offending and also of retail crime in particular, which the Home Affairs Select Committee has been looking at recently.
Minister.
Well, the Right Honourable Lady is right to say that arrests of offenders of the kinds she describes are extremely important indeed, and at no point would I ever expect, even in the contingency outlined, which in fact never came to pass as I set out already, but even in that contingency, offenders of the kind she referenced would have continued to be arrested. That is critically important. As I said, the ECSL 70 measure comes into effect tomorrow and is designed to make sure scenarios of the kind she describes never come about. Because as police minister, I want to make sure we never see the situation that she describes.
Sir Christopher Church.
Mr. Speaker, will my honourable friend accept that the action by the National Police Chiefs Council leader is against the separation of powers principles? We make the law in this House and we expect it to be implemented and administered without fear or favour. And what it seems to be happening is that unelected chiefs, such as the Police Chiefs Council leader, are interfering with the administration of justice. Does my honourable friend agree that things would be a lot better if the Criminal Justice Board hadn't failed to meet for 2 years, which is apparently what has happened, and would he accept that we need to start putting things right? In today's times, they describe it as a failure of administration.
I'd like to confirm the Criminal Justice Board, chaired by my honourable friend, the Lord Chancellor, meets very frequently. And indeed, I was at the most recent meeting with him and other ministers, police leads, senior judiciary, the Crown Prosecution Service and many others just 3 or 4 weeks ago. So I can categorically confirm that it does exist and it is sitting and meeting on a regular basis. In relation to his question about the police are rightly operationally independent. It's not for ministers to direct how they discharge their duties. They discharge their duties in such a way that their professional standards and professional judgment makes most appropriate, and we obviously support them in discharging their duties. But operational independence for police is very important, and I'm sure everyone on both sides of the House would respect it.
Mr. Carmichael.
It's obvious from the Minister's demeanour that he doesn't like to be called to account, but he should reflect on the fact that the mere fact that a letter of this sort was written in the circumstances that it was should be a cause for concern which he should be taking seriously, because this is symptomatic of a wider malaise in the English and Welsh criminal justice system. Last year, 215,933 burglaries went unsolved across England and Wales, an average of 592 a day. Is that not something that the Minister should be addressing, rather than getting a little bit worked up with the Shadow Home Secretary?
Well, I mean, I may have got worked up because the allegations being made were, in my view, unfounded and unsupported by the facts. And I think I was just simply trying to put across the facts, both the numbers and also the quotes from the relevant policing lead, which flatly contradicted the dystopian picture the Shadow Home Secretary was characteristically seeking to paint. But to answer his question, yes, we do take it seriously. Of course we do. The Lord Chancellor is working night and day to increase prison capacity, both by building new prisons in an expeditious fashion and pulling every lever at his disposal to build more capacity within the existing estate. The reasons the prisons are pretty full is because the police have done a good job at identifying, catching and incarcerating dangerous criminals. But a thoughtful approach of the kind called for by the Chair of the Justice Select Committee has been taken, and that is why, with the implementation of ECSL tomorrow, the contingencies provided for in the letter of last week will no longer be required. It was an 8-day period, and thankfully those contingencies in practice and in fact were not required.
Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's reassuring to hear from the Minister the contingencies weren't required, but it's quite interesting to see that this letter was actually issued. Given his own reactions here today to that, what process has he put in place to ensure that before any such instructions or suggestions are issued, he is consulted?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question, and of course as a former Home Office Minister he has a great deal of experience in this area. As I said, of course the police are operationally independent, but we do liaise very closely with them, with the National Police Chiefs Council, and I have regular discussions with Gavin Stevens, who is the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council, and in relation to this matter with Chief Constable Rob Nixon, who is the CJ lead, and with Deputy Chief Constable Nev Kemp of Surrey, who is the National Police Chiefs Council lead for custody. And I'd like to take this opportunity to place on record my thanks to the police up and down the country for their careful management over the last 7 days, which have ensured our fellow citizens have been kept safe.
Lynch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. North and West Yorkshire have just arrested 62 people in a county lines operation. They seized swords, a machete, a crossbone, took 3 kilograms of cannabis, crack cocaine and heroin off the streets alongside the misery and violence which characterises county lines gangs. I'm so grateful to them for that work, but is this government suggesting that they should have allowed this to continue until further notice under these contingency plans, all because they have so mismanaged the criminal justice system and the collapse in prison places?
Well, I mean, first of all, the prison places haven't collapsed. I think there are more prison places now than there have been in the recent past. But look, I'd like to congratulate the South and West Yorkshire Police for that operation, which I think the Honourable Lady said had led to 62 arrests of dangerous criminals. And as I said in my previous answers, none of the contingencies referenced were activated, and I'm sure there would never have been any question of not arresting dangerous criminals of the kind that she describes. That operation is exactly the kind of operation we like to see. I think we've closed down something like, I'm speaking from memory, I think it's something like 6,000 county lines in the last 4 years, and I'm delighted to see those kind of operations successfully putting these dangerous criminals where they belong, which is behind bars.
So, Speaker, I'm very glad to hear that the contingency contained in this letter was not required. But you can tell, Mr. Speaker, how tough this government is being on crime and on criminals by the very heavy population that is in our prison estate. But the long-term solution to that is, of course, to build more prisons. And I'd be grateful if the Minister could give an update as to when he estimates the prison building programme will catch up with the prison population.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. The Justice Secretary and his right honourable friend, the Prisons Minister, who is here as well, are building prison capacity rapidly. By the end of next year, they'll have added 10,000 prison places, including places like Millsike, HMP Millsike, which will be open shortly. So we are embarking on a huge prison construction programme, which is on top of the fact we already have record numbers of prison places, and the fact that we have filled those up with criminals serving typically longer sentences is testament to the successful approach to law and order this government's taken.
Florence Session-Lerman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last Friday, I attended a community meeting in my constituency with a group of residents, our local Safer Neighbourhood team, and some of our elected councillors. It was in response to a fatal shooting of a young 26-year-old. What the residents said at that meeting was having the reassurance to know that a suspect had already been arrested, thanks to the work of the local police. What is the Minister's message to my constituents and many others across the country where suspects will now not be arrested as a result of this guidance?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm pay tribute to her local police and the work they've done, but I would just gently refer her to my previous answers. There have been no arrests that ought to have taken place but did not as a result of this contingency, and the way she framed her question completely ignored the answers I'd previously given. The contingencies referred to in the letter were not, in fact, required, and therefore her constituents and everybody else's can be assured the police are continuing to do their job arresting dangerous criminals.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for the update to the House. In London, we have a challenge of the Metropolitan Police failing to meet their recruitment targets. The police in London are under incredible pressure at weekends on policing hate marches and other demonstrations in central London, and police are being drawn in from outside London in order to carry that out. Now that the mayoral election is over, what action is my honourable friend taking with the Mayor of London to make sure the Met Police meet their recruitment targets, the police are trained properly and can actually get on with the job of catching criminals?
Well, my honourable friend is right to raise the question of police numbers in London. Whereas across England and Wales as a whole we have record police numbers, and 42 of the 43 police forces met their recruitment target. There was one which didn't. That was the Metropolitan Police under Sadiq Khan, and in fact their numbers unfortunately have shrunk in the last year rather than grown. I therefore attended the Police Performance Oversight Group, which is the special measures group chaired by the Chief Inspector just a few days ago, attended by the Commissioner but also by the Deputy Mayor, Sophie Linden. Unfortunately, Sadiq Khan didn't see fit to show up to that meeting, and one of the points that I made forcefully was the importance of growing police numbers in London. It is the only force in the country to miss its target, and that must be turned around.
Sammy Wilson. Speaker. Let me get this right. The government's boasting that it appointed 20,000 extra policemen and women in order to prevent crime and protect the public. Criminals create and undertake crimes, and an instruction is given to the police not to arrest them because the prisons are full. And the government's defence is, it's all right, the instruction was never acted on. Can the public really have any confidence if it is possible for the police to give instructions today and maybe again next week not to arrest criminals? Can we really believe that crime is being taken seriously in this country?
Well, crime is being taken very seriously, which is why it's fallen by 6% in the last year and why it's fallen 55% since 2010. The Honourable Gentleman is referring to a period of 8 days, just 8 days, when a contingency was considered but not used. The Lord Chancellor, in a thoughtful and measured manner, quite rightly, has taken steps which will take effect tomorrow to ensure that such a contingency is not required going forward, and that is a responsible way of handling the situation.
Jess Phillips.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So the Minister has stood in front of us today and said it would never be any of the kind of crimes you're talking about here that would ever be done. But the Prime Minister said last week at PMQs no one would be put on the scheme, talking about the early release scheme, if they were deemed a threat to public safety. So he said that. The Minister's basically saying the same thing today. And yet my inbox is full of victims of domestic violence, rape and sexual violence, child abuse, sending me cases where incidents of multiple perpetrators, of multiple women, are being released early from prison. So does he think that somebody who has raped somebody, then gone to prison, then come out, done it again, isn't deemed a threat to the public?
Well, I can answer her question very specifically. The early release scheme the Lord Chancellor has established expressly excludes serious violent and sexual offenders, which includes rapists. There is an additional safeguard which did not exist in the previous Labour government's equivalent scheme, and that equivalent safeguard is a governor's veto, where the governor can veto early release if the governor believes there is a threat to public safety.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm glad the Minister's brought the Lord Chancellor and the Prisons Minister with him, as they can explain how 70-day early release or Operation Early Dawn mean that criminals are either not being locked up or are being let out early. Isn't the truth that he's presiding over operational failures in policing, in the courts and in the prison system, and he's responding to those with ad hoc panic measures?
Well, I mean, the police are successfully reducing crime, for which I thank them. This year there were, I think, or the most recent year for which figures are available, the last calendar year, there were, I think, about 30,000 more successful outcomes, which typically means a prosecution, than there were the previous year. Now, the court system and the prison system in this country, England and Wales, as in other places, including Scotland, but also other countries around the world, are under pressure, candidly speaking, largely as a result of the post-COVID environment and delays that built up in the system during COVID that have not yet cleared. But that's not unique to this jurisdiction. I would also say that those people released, according to the criteria which I just mentioned, are of course closely supervised under licence and subject to recall should they breach that licence.
Stephanie Peacock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Johnny Wood, my constituent's sister Jackie, was tragically killed by 4 men driving a stolen lorry in 2018. They were convicted of dangerous driving. One of the men has been released from prison, having served only half his sentence, just 5 years, and he has been reported now to have broken his banning order from the local area while under supervision from the probation service. Johnny and his family have been let down by every part of the system over the last 6 years. So what is the Minister's message to Johnny, and what specifically can he do to help in this case?
Well, look, I've got every sympathy for victims such as her constituent and the truly tragic case that she outlines. If there are particular aspects of that case she'd like us to look into, if it's a policing-related matter, if she approaches me, I'll be very happy to help. If it's a prisons or probation-related issue or a sentencing-related issue, then my right honourable friends from the Ministry of Justice would stand ready to help her and her constituent in the case she raises. In relation to early sort of automatic release more generally onto licence, of course, under the last Labour government, I think all offenders ended up getting automatically released at the halfway point. It's this government that has substantially reduced that, including offences such as rape. And I recall in Bill Committee a couple of years ago, Labour MPs voting against a measure that kept rapists in prison for longer.
Chiomora.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over the weekend, I was almost in tears via a letter to me from a local primary school with an account of one of their young mums who felt so intimidated by antisocial behaviour on her estate that she was unable to walk her young son to school in the morning. And the school had tried to provide security with a social worker to escort her, but they themselves felt very intimidated. Wow. So what message does it send to that school, to that mum, to that child about the safety of our streets when chief constables feel it necessary to deprioritise arrests under his watch?
Well, cases of the kind she described would not have been in the scope of the contingency outlined in the letter of a week ago. In relation to antisocial behaviour, what she's describing is completely unacceptable. I'm sure many of us here are parents and would want our own children to go to and from school safely. The government's launched an antisocial behaviour action plan, one of the elements of which is a funded scheme for antisocial behaviour hotspot patrols. That started just a few weeks ago. And so I'd urge the Honourable Lady to speak to her local police and crime commissioner, I think a newly elected one in Northumbria, if memory serves me correctly, and perhaps asks that one of the funded hotspot patrols might be set up in the vicinity of that school to try and tackle the issue that she's describing, because no parent should have to face what she just described.
Mohammed Yassin.
Madam Deputy Speaker, figures published last month showed Bedfordshire Police has the slowest response time for answering 999 calls because of force and it's the worst force answering 999 calls because of understaffing. Does the Minister realise how ridiculous it sounds asking police not to police and to arrest fewer people because his government has broken the justice system and is allowing criminals to get away scot-free?
Well, I mean, I think that is a completely, if I may say, Madam Deputy Speaker, inaccurate characterisation of the situation. This 8-day period required a contingency that was not required. So I've already read out to the House an assurance from the relevant National Police Chief Council lead that arrests were not foregone or cancelled as a result of the contingency. Look more widely, as I said before, we have record police numbers, we have lower crime than we had 14 years ago, and that is something I would have thought we could all welcome.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The issue with prison capacity is partly a crisis of reoffending. Dartmoor Prison was subject to an inspection last year and was awarded only 1 out of 4 because of inadequate education and work opportunities. Yeah. HMP Dartmoor holds a large number of people convicted of sexual offences, but the report says there were no accredited programmes for rehabilitation. Sexual offences in Devon and Cornwall rose by 19% in the year to 2023. Does the Minister accept that the prison capacity crisis is partly about reoffending, and what is he doing about it?
Yeah, well, the Lord Chancellor, Justice Secretary, has assured me that actually Dartmoor is a well-run and well-regarded prison. One of the reasons why my colleagues in the Ministry of Justice here with me on the bench are presiding over such a large increase in prison capacity is to make sure that prisoners can be better rehabilitated within the prison estate. He mentioned reoffending. He's absolutely right to do so. Preventing reoffending is critical, and that's why one of the things I do in my role connected with drugs is to try and get more people, because much offending is connected with drug addiction, getting off half of it, some estimates suggest. So getting more people into treatment is important, both from the court system, within the prison estate, but then critically making sure that as people leave prison and re-enter the community, that drug treatment they may have been receiving in prison is then continued in the community. We call it continuity of care. That has increased quite dramatically recently. I'd like it to increase even more, and that I think is one of the ways we will reduce reoffending that he quite rightly refers to as an important policy objective.
Point of order.
Does the point of order relate to the... Point of order, Just Phillips.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wonder if you could help me in getting some answers to... the Minister said earlier during this urgent question that certain criminals who are a risk to the public would not be being released. Unlike Charlie Taylor, the Inspectorate of Prisons, who said that high-risk prisoners are being released under this early scheme. And to a case that I have heard where it took the court 29 months to hold a sentencing hearing on ABH against two different people as part of a domestic abuse situation. The prisoner was sentenced to 4 years and was deemed to be such a risk to be put on remand because of previous sexual violence convictions, and on the day of the hearing for the sentencing was released immediately because he had been identified as being suitable for early release. And yet the Minister told me today that nobody with a sexual offending history or is a risk to the public or in cases of domestic abuse would be released. And yet this is just one of many cases I have, and I just wonder if whether there is an issue about whether the Prime Minister and, in fact, the Minister today have misled the House, and if she could advise me how I take that up.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her point of order. I'm sure she meant to say, if she was indicating misleading the House, that it would be inadvertent. I am not responsible, obviously, for responses from ministers, but the Minister is still here, will have heard her comments, as with the Treasury bench as well. I don't know if the Minister wishes to further to that point of order.
Further to that point of order, I mean, she raised an individual case, and I'm sure the Lord Chancellor will be happy to look at an individual case for her. She mentioned someone released upon sentencing. Of course, the court or the probation service will look at time served on remand already. So a prisoner may have been on remand for quite a long time at the point they come to a sentencing hearing. But just to repeat the more general rules, it's a Ministry of Justice policy, but the release onto licence after 70 days prior to the ordinary release point does not apply to any prisoner serving a sentence of more than 4 years. It doesn't apply to any prisoner serving a sentence for serious sexual or violent offences, and the governor of the prison has a veto such that a prisoner considered to be a danger, the governor can veto the release of that prisoner. So those are the safeguards that are in place. But I'm sure if the Honourable Lady wants to debate it in more detail, my colleague, the Lord Chancellor, will be very happy to do that.
Well, I thank the Minister for stating the position that he has, and I would suggest that perhaps the offer of a further discussion with the Lord Chancellor would be appropriate, and I'm sure the Honourable Lady will come back after that if she feels that there are further points that she wishes to make. She's very experienced in knowing how to make her views known in the House. So I'm sure that is probably the best way forward for now.